Hi everyone, hope you are having a great day. This is Tony here from the University of Cape Town. We're here at the Lawazi Hackathon workshop, and here I have one of the participants from the workshop. So tell us about yourself, sir.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian O'Connor. I am the co-lead for the cloud workstream in GA4GH, and I'm here representing GA4GH and our workstream activities for the Alwazi project. Alwazi is using many of the cloud APIs that the team I'm a part of in GA4GH is working on. So happy to be here.
Okay, great. So Brian, for those of us who don't really know what the GH is, can you just explain it in a sentence or two?
Sure. Yeah, so GA4GH is the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. And what we're doing in the cloud workstream is we're creating APIs, creating standards that allow computational systems to talk to each other. So if you have data that you're storing and want to share with colleagues, if you have compute that you want to share with other systems, the cloud workstream in GA4GH is creating standards that help with that. GA4GH has a broader mission than just the cloud APIs. There are multiple work streams. I think there are 8 or 9 altogether, and they work on everything from policy frameworks to file exchange standards, if you've used CRAM or BAM files, for example, BCF files, to the sort of work that we do in the cloud, which is working on APIs like DIRS and TESS and WES and TERS that help share compute and data.
Okay, so I think many of the institutions or organizations we work with are based on the African continent, and we obviously get a lot of support from the global north. But with that in perspective, is there a sort of barrier of entry if they want to use your cloud cluster? How does the support work?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. So in GA4GH, we're working on the standards themselves, right?
Okay.
And so it's up to institutions and organizations to implement those within their computational environments, right? So if you have an HPC environment at your university, you can use one of the starter kits. You can use an implementation like WestKit or a community-based implementation or even commercial implementations to put GA4GH APIs on top of your infrastructure. And so in GA4GH, we make the standards. We make starter kits where you can kick the tires pretty easily. We make testing kits to make sure that your implementation is compliant. But we, rely on the community to build both open source versions of that implement these standards, as well as commercial partners that will build commercial versions that use these standards.
Okay, so it sounds like you sort of cater to a range of audience, B2C, B2B.
Yeah.
In terms of support, is there a monthly premium, or if they struggle, is there technical?
Oh, yeah. So within GA4GH is a standards body that works on these API standards and whatnot. We have every other week we have a cloud workstream meeting. So people can come into that and talk about, hey, I'd love to see this added to the DIRS standard, or I'm struggling with my implementation. I don't understand what this part of the WES spec is trying to say. So that's the part that GA4GH can help with. In terms of the implementations out there, like I said, there's open source implementations. There's things like DocStore or WestKit that each are open source projects and have their own ways of engaging with the community and supporting users of that software, as well as commercial groups. You have things like DNA Stack, who's here at the hackathon, who their business model is providing support for people that are deploying their software and using it. So it's really, kind of a wide range of ways of getting support. But, on my side, I'm primarily working on the cloud work stream within GA4GH that's focused on the standard itself. and helping implementers to roll those standards out and helping to evolve those standards. In terms of end users, like, again, typically an institution would deploy a software implementation of a GA4GH standard, and then have, perhaps a user community around that institution or university to help support the use of that by researchers in that organization.
Okay. So I don't know if you have traveled to other parts of Africa, working on various different projects, but from your perspective, how has the landscape sort of changed in the past few years, since COVID?
Right. I mean, I think that's a really cool question. Taking a step back, since COVID, what I've noticed is within different areas of the world, we've seen different adoptions of these technologies, of these standards. So like in North America, we've seen a lot of systems implementing the Data Repository Service, or DRS, so they can share their data out with other systems in North America. In Europe, we've seen a lot of kind of the opposite, where we've seen a lot of systems support workflow execution service, WES, or task execution service, or TESS, and instead of sending their data out, they're having researchers send their algorithms in to data that lives in that particular geolocation, that particular institution that has the data. So we've seen kind of different models evolve over time, and El-Wazi is an interesting one because you see different nodes being stood up, and it's kind of a hybrid model where there's Terra that you can run on Google Cloud, for example. There's DNA Stack that runs on AWS and Google and Azure. And then on the flip side of that, you see El-Wazi nodes that are going to be implementing or are implementing workflow execution service, so you can send the algorithm out to that location. So really kind of a hybrid model there of both being able to use the cloud and kind of pull data into the cloud environment, or send the algorithm back out to these various El-Wazi nodes that have data in resident in that location. So that's kind of the trend that I've seen. Different trends based on North America versus Europe versus here, seeing the El-Wazi project and how that's unfolding.
Okay, so in terms of you have traveled quite extensively and you sort of see the impact this work is being made across different continents, across different regions, and I'm wondering, we are in this fourth industrial revolution where there is the digital age, and we are bombarded with new innovations and technology all the time. And now there's adaptation of AI and AGI. Do you see a lot of that coming up, and how do you think that will shape sort of the future?
Oh, I mean, I think that's the big question right now, right? But I think if we take a step back and look at the GA4GH APIs, Cloud Workstream APIs that I work on, those are great building blocks, whether you're a human being that's trying to span multiple environments and send your algorithm out, or whether you're an AI agent working on behalf of a researcher sending algorithms out to these locations. I think by implementing these APIs, we make it easier for humans and AI agents to use the infrastructure, use the data that's being made accessible through programs that adopt these APIs. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is really interesting with AI tech, improving so rapidly and changing so rapidly is some of the work that we're doing here is focused on some of the problems, like technical interoperability, how you access data, how you send algorithms to compute environments. But there are other aspects that researchers find challenging. So if you're trying to span multiple institutions that each have their own data sets, is that data harmonized? Like, is it harmonized from a bioinformatics perspective? Is it harmonized from a data model perspective? And so I think there's a lot of interesting things that can be done with AI tooling around not just how I send my algorithms out to these various locations and helping me with that, but also, is the data itself harmonized, and can the AI tools help me to harmonize the data and prepare for analysis that spans multiple regions, multiple data sets that all have kind of different data models. So for me personally, I think that's something that's going to be very interesting, is seeing how AI tools can help speed up the other things that are difficult beyond just kind of access data or compute in these locations.
Okay, so we sort of work with the African Union and the African CDC, and obviously they are trying to standardize the healthcare profession, the bioinformatics, across
Sure.
all the regions. And if someone wants to set up a lab in Uganda versus them setting up a lab in Tanzania, it's very different. So, what are the challenges, from your perspective, and what are some of the things the principal investigator should keep in mind when executing these?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a broad question. And I kind of come at it from the perspective of thinking about it from an infrastructure perspective. So I think looking at the intersection of policy and infrastructure. So are they allowed to share their data with collaborators that are on a commercial cloud that maybe is out of country? Are they only allowed to have data be resident in country? So that's going to affect their choices about what infrastructure are they going to want to build at their local institution. Are they going to build something like what El-Wazi is doing with DNA Stack software, something where researchers can come in and use the data locally? Are they going to be able to have collaborators work with the data in a commercial cloud in a region that's perhaps outside of their country? So I think those sorts of considerations are something that, as a researcher standing up their lab, let's say, in a new university environment, thinking about what infrastructure choices are available to them at that intersection of both the software availability, but also like the policies of what are they allowed to do with the data, and as good stewards of the data, how should they be handling it, and how should they be handling it from the perspective of collaborating with others.
Yeah, I think you make some really good, points from an ethical point of view, from a legal perspective as well, and obviously your data privacy for individuals. So these considerations need to be really mapped out and planned ahead.
Yeah.
And in terms of, what GH4GH does is, I'm assuming your headquarters is based in the USA?
So that's interesting because GA4GH, it's a global organization, right?
Okay.
So there are various host institutions, for example, MBLEVI, Broad. So it's a global organization, and the host institutions are located in different locations. I believe there's like 4 or 5 host organizations. OICR is another one in Canada. So it's not centralized to just the US. It is a global organization.
Okay, and then in terms of setting the guidelines or rules or prerequisites, is that all sort of standard across different continents, or does it vary?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I think from the perspective of the cloud work stream that I work in, it's an easier problem because we're trying to design these APIs that allow for data sharing, that allow for computation, sharing, compute sharing. But the policies involved with what's allowed are country by country, right? Or maybe they are sort of semi-universal or adopted by multiple nations, but really that's going to be, the policies that govern what is allowed or what compliance needs to happen when you roll these technologies, these standards out. It's going to be region specific. So, within the GA4GH, like, there are policy frameworks, there are working groups that help try to look for, essentially starting places that groups can use, and policy frameworks that can be broadly applicable. But within the technical standards that I work on, we tend to be kind of one step removed from the policies regarding their implementation or their rollout.
Okay. And so I sort of get that you have these sort of top-down frameworks, but it's not really enforced. Certain regions can sort of try to look at this, but modify it or adopt it depending on.
Exactly. So think of the cloud standards that we're working on, which again are a part of many different standards that GA4GH has. But cloud standards, for example, they're Lego bricks, right? And how you assemble them and what you allow people to do with them really depends on the sort of local laws and policies
Right.
that govern your work.
Okay. As we sort of come to the end of this interview, I have two last questions.
Sure.
So I think the one question I really have is around, this bifurcation of society, whether it's in developed countries or developing countries. So we really have, barrier of entries for a lot of young African scientists or, institutions that really don't have the human expertise, the infrastructure expertise to reach this level of competence. And I think currently there's a lot of funding that comes from the global north to support these structures. But going forward, what does what does South Africa need to do as, what institutions in Africa need to do to sort of position themselves at the epicenter of becoming, a developing a global standard or being successful in that manner?
I mean, I think that's such a big question.
Okay.
An enormous question, but I kind of take a step back when I think about that. And one of the things that I think is really awesome about seeing these cloud APIs get more adopted is we're moving towards a future where, researchers can think about their sort of research more as data visiting, and I don't have to have everything at my local institution in order to ask questions of these amazing data sets spread around Africa, spread around Asia, spread around Europe and the US and whatnot. But as a researcher, I can encapsulate my algorithms and start sending them out. And we're seeing this trend, right? We're seeing this trend where data and compute is becoming more accessible, sort of globally, and becoming more accessible to researchers that traditionally the model was, I'm going to download to my institution, and if I don't have enough storage or I don't have enough compute there, I'm kind of stuck. Right? So I think this is, you ask a much bigger question, but I think the adoption of these APIs, adoption of these standards globally, and we've seen that over the last 5 years, I think probably about 30, 40 petabytes of data being accessible over DERS kind of globally, right? So we're seeing that trend of these data sets, the compute being made accessible. And I think as that continues, it will be empowering for people everywhere to be able to ask questions of these data sets that they couldn't follow that model of download locally and compute locally and in the past. That has been the predominant model. So I think that is part of the overall puzzle, right? It's a small piece, right? And it's overall your question is very broad, but it does point to a future where you don't have to have all the infrastructure right at your local institution to ask those key informative questions of the data.
Yeah, I think as you adequately put it, reduce that barrier of cost of entry, making sure that it's accessible, redundant, and people can access it, and you're able to disseminate, the information or the data so that people can access it and obviously do downstream analysis. Okay, so I think the very last question I would like to ask you is, you come from a developed country, so America is, the most powerful superpower in the world, and obviously Africa, there's a lot of challenges, there's geopolitical tensions. There are some African countries that's, deemed a failed state, which they don't have a working government. I know that Cape Town, South Africa, we had load shedding for 8-9 years when we, don't have power between 2 and 6 hours a few times a day. So there are those, social economical challenges for, someone who's currently, in high school or in university, the next generation of young scientists that want to come and, really support or get, the torch passed onto them. What are some of your sort of advice or key insight that you can share with them to help with their own professional journey?
Oh, I mean, again, really a broad and interesting question, and there's so much to unpack there. But I think what I point to right now is technology is changing so quickly. And we have things like AI that, like, just a couple years ago, you and I sitting here, we wouldn't even be thinking about it. But right now in that room, a bunch of us are using Claude Code and other technologies to kind of even the playing field, right? And to really try and make the work that we're doing more efficient and more accessible. And so I'm really excited to see technologies like that, LLM-based technologies, making coding, using these APIs, using these distributed data sets, distributed compute more accessible to folks. So someone starting early in their career right now, I would say there's so many great technologies coming down the pike, and it changes month over month, week over week. So becoming more familiar with that, it means that you don't necessarily need to have like your HPC cluster locally and do everything locally, but you're starting to be able to use these services to both learn new technology stacks, to rapidly prototype, to rapidly explore in a way that you couldn't do that a few years ago. So I think as a new researcher starting out, a grad student in grad school right now, I would say use and explore the new technologies that are coming out with ChatGPT, Claude, other tech that will undoubtedly, debut in weeks to months from now. Figure out how to use that in your work, and figure out how to use that to speed up the work that you're doing, and to become familiar with things that would have taken weeks of work previously now can be done in an afternoon. So I think that's, again, kind of your question is very broad. But I think that's actually a transformative and a technology that will kind of even out the playing field in many ways and allow people to learn and explore in ways that they couldn't just even a few years ago.
I think that's a really good point, just to make sure that you have technology readily available, use it to your benefit, and make sure that you can elevate or leverage that. That's a really good point.
Nowadays, like, we're headed towards the with one of these technologies, one of these companies, you have the world's best coder riding shotgun with you as you're doing your research. And so being able to leverage that, I think, is an awesome opportunity for all of us, including folks that are early in their career.
No, that's really insightful. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was good.